I'm the co-chair of the Master Plan Steering Committee. Lindsay Famara is the other co-chair, wasn't able to be here, sends her regrets. I want to first welcome everybody for coming. I want to thank you for coming. It's a beautiful day, it's a weekend, and having so many people take the time to come and participate in this important process, interesting, you can stand right in front of the mic. It's wonderful, so we can't thank you enough for that. Before we get going, I want to thank the people at the St. Augustine Parish for letting us use this space. It's very convenient. I want to thank you. And tomorrow, we're really taking a different turn, which is exciting for me on the steering committee. We're digging in and looking in more detail at the three commercial districts. The downtown commercial district, Main Street and around, the waterfront commercial district, and then the State Road commercial district, also known as B2. These are so important, obviously, to the economic health of the town, to the commercial activities in the town, and we really need to flesh out those plans in considerable detail. But what does that mean? When you go around, and you'll see a lot more about this, you'll see all these maps of what those areas look like today. And when we're done with this effort, we expect to have a new set of maps. And you'll see what's going to change, or what we'd like to see change. Is there more green space? Is there less green space? Is there more development? Is there less development? Is there new infrastructure? What does that look like? All those important things that are critical to our tax base and critical to the growth and the vibrancy of our town. So that's really what this is all about. We're not going to get to that point today and tomorrow, coming back tomorrow, but I can assure you that the conversations we have today, the input you provide today and tomorrow will be very useful, very critical to that goal, of achieving that goal. So that's all I was going to say. Let me now turn over to Judy Barrett.
So I'm Judy Barrett, and I'm delighted to be here. I think we've met a few of you, and a lot of you we haven't, so this is really good for us. I think the more people we meet in the community, the more we learn. I'm going to introduce the team. We have other firms on this master plan team. So I introduced us, I can move on. The agenda, we've already, I think, all gotten food. Food's wonderful back there. This is your introductory presentation, which I'm not going to do all of, I'm just doing a little bit of it. We're going to break into some small group activities around the room, that's what all these stations are for. You're going to rotate among the 4 stations, one of which is devoted to transportation. Another is to environment and climate resilience. We're doing housing and businesses, and then Peter and Dylan are going to be focusing on kind of design and placemaking. So I was asked to try to explain to people a little bit about, what a master plan is. And your town doesn't have one right now. Your town really remarkably has done a lot of planning. But one of the things we learned along the way is that for a lot of that planning that has been done, although some things have been implemented, a lot of other things have not. So we're trying to understand the town's capacity to do planning implementation, and so that we don't give you a plan you can't do anything with. So trying to understand the capacity of local government, of the various citizen groups and so forth, is a very important part of what we do. A master plan, in the end, it's a roadmap, is really what it is. It's a roadmap for managing change. Every time we work on one of these projects, we hear people talk about, I don't want to grow, I don't want any more growth, I want all preservation, or I want more growth. But really what's underneath all of that is that communities are changing. And I'm sure any of you who've lived here for a while have probably seen quite a bit of change in Tisbury as well. And they're going to continue to change. What a master plan can help you do is manage it. It matters because, first of all, it can help you understand the things that you need to do to achieve your goals. It really can help you avoid costly mistakes if you implement your plan. It can lead to effective land use policies to guide development in a way that's better than perhaps people feel is happening today, if you implement it. It requires working together to sort of balance competing interests if you work together to implement it. Why are we doing this now? Well, first of all, we were asked to. We were delighted to come here to work on this project, but I think you all know you have public facilities and infrastructure needs that are pretty significant in this community. They need reinvestment, you need capital planning, more effective than you have right now. You need asset management, sort of like, what do we have? What's in our asset inventory? And what condition is everything in? And what are the priorities? Because you can't do it all at the same time. Climate concerns need more focus today, perhaps, than when the vision plan was done in 2015. So this is a good time to be having these conversations. And good that we have Ellie and people from Horsley Witten Group who are kind of national experts in this to help the community. Your zoning needs a major overhaul. I confess I worked on your housing plan about 6 years ago, and Cheryl will tell you this too. My first thought when I opened up your zoning bylaw was, oh goodness sakes, you guys really need work on this. So the master plan can help sort of guide you in thinking about how do you right size and right fit your zoning bylaw to the needs of the community today. Implementation capacity needs assessment. It's something we're really looking at. Do you have the government structure, the people in place, the kinds of connections between boards and commissions to actually implement the plan, and what kinds of things need to happen to perhaps improve that system. The business districts need attention. It's why we're here tonight. The master plan scope includes this assessment and vision plans for these business districts for a reason. They need a lot of attention. We've heard a little bit, so far just from talking to people, that there is kind of a sense among the business community that maybe government could be a better partner, and we're trying to understand kind of how all that works. This is roughly the schedule that we're working on right now. So we're very much into this sort of inventory and assessment, kind of a diagnostic of what the key issues are, revision, and then produce the final in the fall of 2023. So it's roughly a 15-month schedule. Sometimes they take a little longer, sometimes they take a little less. So vision for the commercial
So
district.
I'm Dylan Sussman, I'm from Dodson, like Judy said. Thank you all for coming tonight. So Judy was telling you about the master plan in general, and tonight we're focused on a vision for the commercial districts. So it's one part of the master plan, but it's a pretty important part of the master plan. And what we mean by a vision for the commercial districts is a very sort of concrete sense of what you want these places to be like in the future, that we're going to express in drawings showing specifically what the community wants, and also in words. Ideally, that gives you a direction for the future. We've looked at a lot of plans that have been done. There are a lot of really great ideas, and so we acknowledge that, that planning history, and I think the challenge now is to figure out which of those great ideas is the best, and which of those fit together to make something that's cohesive and something that you can all agree on and move forward with. So we're doing this because the planning board feels like it's a priority. I think for them it's a priority because they've been needing clear direction about how to move forward. And also it would be valuable for permit review, I think, to have a sense of where there are gray areas in the zoning bylaw, whether something is appropriate or not, and have that grounded in a real sense of what the future of the community wants is. They're also really just consequential areas for the town, right? This is where your businesses are, it's your economic driver. They're also, they're transportation hubs. We've got the ferry coming into the waterfront district. We've got State Road going through it. So some of your biggest challenges and opportunities are in those areas. And then finally, the visions are valuable because master plans can be very abstract because they're looking at all the systems of your town. And doing the vision gives you an opportunity to test out the kinds of ideas that the master plan has and make them a little bit more concrete. So over the course of today and tomorrow, we're hoping to tonight get a better sense of what is happening in these areas. What are their strengths, their weaknesses, their opportunities, what's changing over time.
So we're looking at specific areas and thinking about what do we want to do next year, the year after that, what do we need to change in order to get where we want to go down the road, and sort of what's our vision, but also what's the, as designers and planners say, what's the critical path to getting there. And so we're going to be doing that over the next, tonight, tomorrow morning, looking in detail at maps of the two study areas and talking about what's working and what's not working, and then looking at, let's think about all the ideas for these places in the past and acknowledge those, and think about what are the ones that still rise to the top, and how do we really make those happen? And what order do we have to do things, again, to make that work? So the first area, as you know, is the downtown. We're sort of combining the downtown, sort of Main Street zoning district, the B1, with the waterfront zoning district and really thinking of this as it is in reality, a single entity that's working and people living and working and playing all the time. The other district, of course, is the B2 district, which I think all of us have been very familiar with the State Road Corridor for many years, but many people are not really familiar about how much is going on the hundreds of acres behind that, including, you know, the town, the old town dump, and it's now the parking area, et cetera. So we'll be talking more about that and thinking about how this works today and what the opportunities are for making it work better for all the reasons that are going to be described in this larger master plan. So if we have a housing issue across the town, how can that be met in these areas? If we have goals for business that aren't working right now, how do we change our physical environment to make better places for business to happen? And what kind of space do we need for businesses? What do we need to do to deal with changing climate and sea level rise and those things? And so all of these are kind of a really great test case for the larger issues that are coming up for discussion as part of the master plan. So how did we get here? I think one of the things as designers and planners, we always want to know, why does it look the way it looks? You know, why is this is crazy? I mean, it's beautiful, but it doesn't make a lot of sense unless you understand how it got to be there. And so this is a quick 5-minute history of these areas. And then we're going to go quickly into some other things. So you're familiar, a lot of you have seen most of these illustrations and drawings and maps. We got a lot of material from Bo Van Riper and from the Martha's Vineyard Museum and other online sources. So we just picked out a few of those to illustrate. But this is 1856 view of basically shipbuilding on the beach. You know, make a dock, bring in the boats, and just go for it. And then the wonderful historic village up on the hill. But of course, this is probably a little bit fanciful. There was probably a lot more going on the beach. But basically this was, you know, the highway to get from one side of the waterfront to the other. This is the 1856 or 57 chart of Holmes Hole. And one of the things we'll be talking about is changes in just the physical environment of how you had Bass Creek, which originally was the exit of, or the main channel out of the lagoon. That changed in, trivia question, what year, 1815? There was a big storm and it opened up the new channel, which you have today, and then they realized they didn't need the old channel. It would be very convenient to dump a load of ballast stones there and then use that as a roadway to get out to the beach. And so the lagoon had new access and the old access was closed. And from the beginning, of course, it was literally a working waterfront because that's what you needed. And this is the lumber, Union Street dock, and then the beginnings of the sort of working waterfront on Beach Road. And then, of course, the ferry coming in, especially as the summer community grew on the island, the importance of the ferry dock as the access for thousands of people visiting the island every year became more and more important and continues today. This is 1914 map showing the waterfront. This is the Dukes County Garage, which was like one of the first, presumably one of the first large garage, automobile garages on the island. But there was a coal storage facility where they delivered the coal. There was a lumber storage facility. So it was literally a working waterfront all the way across. And you know, the summer use of the waterfront was far in the future. By 1890, that summer community had grown. The village itself had grown with the development of William Street and the other streets and a wonderful historic district we have now. In this map, you can still see, this is 1890 or 1892, you can still see Bass Creek coming up right up to the center of town pretty much, but the rest of Bass Creek had been filled in at that point. This is the 1850 map, a wonderful map if you haven't seen it. It's online, it was put together by Harvard Forest, and they were doing research on history of the island. So you can go online and look at the whole island. But what's great is it shows all the areas that were forested, and then the pasture and tillage, sort of cropland, So most of the village was basically, it was a harbor village, but it also was kind of an agricultural village of people farming right up around the edge. And then you see Bass Creek coming in and the area that they filled in to create the causeway.
That's 1890, that one?
This is 1850. And this is it today. So you can see what happened over time is the filling of this triangle in particular is very important in the history of the waterfront, and that was filled what used to be Bass Creek. And I think also the waterfront in general, probably with some filling going on as they were using that for different purposes. This is a wonderful view, 1918, from the Sailors Hospital showing Bass Creek going all the way up, basically the 5 corners, and this is that garage building, which is there at the end of State Road. Yeah, State Road Extension today. All right, there's another one coming. So basically a tidal inlet, probably mudflats and so on, part of the tidal cycle. But this is that area, you know, you can paddle your canoe right up into the center of the village, basically. So something lost and something gained. Obviously, you know, this was a wonderful environment, a natural environment, provided some access, but then as it was filled, it provided room for the village to expand. And this is 1924 proposal. This is actually the area that was filled. And then with the ditch down the center of it, this is a cross-section of that, basically a 3-foot deep ditch, a stone ditch. And then here in 1948, you see that ditch is still there. And then between 1948 and today, of course, that was gradually filled. This image from 1975, you have pretty much, I think, what you have today, which is just the sort of the end stub of Bass Creek coming out into the lagoon. And then you see the businesses that have grown up there. And a lot of these have been replaced over time, more recently, by the market and other businesses. But the large waterfront uses with the tanks have basically evolved in place to serve the shipping and importing oil and other materials, of course. The other thing we want to talk about is changes on Main Street, of course. This is before the 1883 fire. Quite substantial buildings there, again, probably serving more of a commercial purpose than the sort of summer businesses that you have there today, large warehouses and so on. After that, they rebuilt with more of the Victorian style mansard roofs and peaked roofs that you see there today. This is the 1950s. And then the big story here, of course, is the evolution of something which was very much a pedestrian-oriented village for most of its history into something that had to accommodate the automobile. And like beautiful New England villages throughout the region, they continue to struggle with that because there just isn't enough room for all those cars. But from a planning perspective, of course, that's not necessarily a bad thing because it encourages people to get out of their cars and walk. And this kind of a narrow, tight village street is a wonderful place to be. So one of the things we're going to start talking about tonight is how does this work from a transportation perspective and how can we make it work better? But then also, what do we want to hold on here? What do we want to hold on to from a design perspective? Do we want to keep all the buildings at 3 or 4 stories? Do we want to go higher or lower? What do we want to do with the sidewalks? What's good and what's bad? What needs to change? This is a comparison, of course, 1905, I think. Basically, it has the basic pattern of narrow sidewalks. The power lines had come in, and you still have the power lines there today, and the narrow sidewalks, and the relatively narrow passage for parking and driving. But one of the advantages is people go very slow, and so it's relatively safe. As we discovered today, you can basically walk out in the middle of the street with a giant map without looking, and people will see you and stop because they're going slowly. So some of the conclusions for the downtown and the waterfront, you have a village street and the road cross-section, which is basically designed for 18th and 19th century needs and now has to accommodate a lot more traffic, a lot bigger vehicles. You have the 20th century development of these low-lying lands, which is important because that's really an awful lot of economic activity happening there. But as Ellen will talk about later, it's in the floodplain. So what do we do about that, especially as that floodplain gets higher and higher over time? And it's a road system which, like a lot of New England villages, it evolved over time, and it still reflects the sort of 18th century, 19th century needs, particularly the sort of hub and spoke of everything coming down to the five corners. And it was never really rationalized to work, even in olden days, to work very well for circulation within the village. It was sort of like, get to the village, get to the wharf, and get out of town. But in terms of circulating within the village, that kind of hub and spoke doesn't work that well. And then, I think a really interesting issue here is you have really diverse economic, transportation, social functions, all sharing the same space at different times of the year, different times of the day. Every 45 minutes, there's this pulse of cars coming in. And it's really unique, a unique problem which Jeff is going to solve today. Tonight. But it's also, I mean, it's obviously a unique problem, but it's also one of the things that creates an incredible sense of place for this community. It's just a wonderful, kind of place where it's fun to just hang out and watch what's going on. That's what attracts us to these places. So B2 district has a very different history. It's really more of a kind of a rural environment that has transformed into a commercial district. If we look at the B2 district today, this is the solar panels, this is the park and ride, this is the State Street corridor, and this is what it was in 1850, which was woods with some roads going to it, going to the rest of the island. There was pasturage around the pond, pasturage over on the lagoon, and a wonderful sort of ancient woodland, which is gradually, of course, not much of it left. So one of the questions is, what do we do with the part that is left? How do we build what we need while still preserving some of those ancient forest, or at least the forest heritage? So there's the boundary of the site, more or less, on this old map. This is just through time. It's pretty small here, but you can see here's our study area. Here's the power lines coming through. There's also the water line corridor, and then the top of the hill is the water tanks. This is in 1955. You can see in 1948, relatively little development on State Road. It was growing in 1955. This is in 1970. The landfill had expanded to its sort of full extent. It was the pit where apparently they took, after World War II, they dug the sand to build the veterans field that came out of that pit, according to Ben, who's telling us about that today. And then by 1984, it's something close to what there is today, with the sort of traditional suburban strip. And here's what it is today. And I think one of the key characteristics of any suburban strip is it tends to happen literally in strips of land. Part of that is you have large properties, probably former farms, and as these were subdivided, you sort of make these long, narrow lots. Everyone wanted to have access on the main road, and then they just cut the line to the back of whatever the farm was. And so it's sort of classic commercial strip development, where everybody then has to come out onto the main road in order to get anywhere. And because it wasn't done as a sort of community plan, there's no connection between the lots in the rear. This is something we see in every post-war commercial strip, pretty much everywhere in the country. So the resulting character of that, I mean, surprisingly in some ways, the visual character along the State Road is pretty nice. There's large trees, there's lawns, there's a lot of old homes that are still pretty quaint. And a lot of the new stuff that's been built, it's been done in pretty nice architecture compared to typical commercial strips. There's a nice buffer in front of Cronin's Market. There's a lot of green space and a lot of trees. So again, you drive through here, for years, and you never really realize there's so much going on in the back. The other thing that's unique about this area, we want to talk about this more tomorrow, is the connectivity that's possible with the open space to the north and the south. So this is our site, this is the town-owned land, the landfill, the DPW, and then to the south there's an extraordinary area of open space, and the blue are trails that already exist. And there's a connection down to the Wapatecla Woods, where this is up the end of the landfill, and just a whole network of trails that come through there. And we've also been looking at plans that have been done over the years to show how you can walk all the way from here and then right down to the center of town, the waterfront. So a really nice possibility for connecting open space as well as reconnecting and rethinking the commercial space. So again, some of the conclusions about this area, it's a rural corridor that has become, not quite accidentally, but incrementally, a center of public and private services and utilities. The topography and the original lot layout, I think, has really led to this sense of long, narrow lots accessing all onto State Road, which has created some challenges for circulation. But it has and will continue to meet the need for these larger commercial spaces, whether they're market spaces like the market, or I don't know, there's dozens of these large sort of metal structures that are accommodating different kinds of businesses, storage and so on. There's a sort of real need for that, and this area serves that need for the whole island, as you know. And then we have overlaid with that a sort of growing market demand for a greater diversity of uses, especially as the price of land skyrockets elsewhere. This area is a lot of opportunity to combine maybe reuse of some of these commercial spaces with residential uses and other kinds of commercial uses that maybe haven't been here before. So now we're going to hear a little bit about transportation.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Jeff Max Tunis from Beta Group. So we've read the reports, we've talked to a lot of folks, done interviews, done some site visits. This is kind of what we're taking away. It's not everything, but we want to hear from you. These are probably familiar to you, a lot of these issues and opportunities, but got a couple slides here based on what we're looking at right now. Like Dylan said, this is just the beginning, and we want to hear your input tonight on some of these issues and opportunities. No surprise, there's a lot of traffic and congestion, particularly in the summertime, and really affects all types of vehicles, including transit, emergency vehicles, and residents and visitors. Five Corners has been historically, congested, conflicting location for decades, including the circulation patterns, around downtown. There's some high crash locations, part of the state database that come up. As I think Peter said, there's several roadways in town that are susceptible to flooding and future sea level rise. Lake Kashmir has experienced more boating pressure in recent years. There's a wonderful bus service by BTA that is actually well operated and has high ridership, island-wide, so that's a great benefit to the community. One of the things, talking to people and looking at, all the transportation impacts funnel in through the ferry area, and people have to go out to the island, but you receive a lot of those, or all those impacts, and what benefits do you get from that transportation? I think that's a big question. The park and ride law is well used and helps relieve some of that congestion by having cars parked there. All the roadways are used well by walking, biking, and obviously traffic. The sidewalk network is really concentrated around Vineyard Haven and downtown, but it leads to opportunities in providing more connections, as Peter was showing just on that recent map. and also filling in gaps of those connections. So, if we want to make improvements to walking and biking, those facilities have to be provided. The sidewalks are narrow in some cases. It's hard to walk side by side. It's confusing in the ferry, terminal area for pedestrians coming off the ferry of where they're supposed to go and wayfinding signage. Improvements can be made as a gateway and more of a sense of place. People are in a place here. And then just the last thing I have here is, it's good news, actually. The town is part of the Mass DOT Complete Streets program. Complete Streets is really for alternative transportation, really walking and biking for people of all ages and abilities. And the town has participated that in the past, but they are eligible for $500,000 right now for new improvements. So that's a good piece of news. So looking at walking and biking improvements, that's a source of funding that the town is eligible for. So those are some of the ideas. I didn't get down to some of the nitty-gritty items, and you might want to raise those tonight, whether it's the stop and shop, parking lot, or a lot of other issues. We'd like to hear from you. So I think with that,
Talk a little bit about just some things we picked up on housing and the business environment here. On the housing side, I don't think this is any surprise to anybody here. I think the affordability of the community for future generations is really uncertain. Your housing prices are just very high here. I don't think that's any surprise to anybody. Tear downs, reinvestment, expansion of existing homes, just investment in existing stock also kind of further depletes affordability as people move in, buy a home, invest in it, improve it. Naturally, the value goes up, and people can do that because it's their home. The question is then, how do you replace or provide for a sort of compensatory affordable stock so that normal people can live here? And that's you're not the only community that's wrestling with this, but I think it's a particular challenge in island environments. The seasonal market kind of, it limits sort of your housing opportunities because it's a market that has money. You have the situation here that I see in other kind of resort areas where we've worked. You have multiple markets competing for the same inadequate supply. And as a result, that affects the pricing of housing overall. You're a year-round community, but you have a lot of seasonal stock here as well. New construction is limited by the available land, wastewater infrastructure, and land prices. So naturally, the stock that you have is stock that people are going to be willing to spend money on in order to be able to live here, either year-round or part-time. There are housing affordability challenges for your town staff. I don't think that's probably any surprise for anybody here, but your ability of your town employees to live here and stay here is a challenge, just because of the price of housing versus the wages that the island is able to pay. Most of your households that have lower incomes are what we call housing cost burdened, which means that they have a house, they're living in it, or an apartment, but they're paying more than they really can afford. And so when we see that as policy analysts, what it tells us is that other things are being sacrificed in order to be able to keep the home. It's the kind of thing that leads to food instability, food insecurity, housing instability, and a variety of other problems. Things that just don't get taken care of because people are trying to hang on to the home that they live in. We're working to understand the kind of needs of the most vulnerable people here, which is kind of a combination of talking to social service folks, town staff, and so forth. But understanding the needs of the vulnerable, it's not just about income, it's also about all these other issues that kind of come to bear that affect people's ability to find a house or a home that's appropriate for them and for their life circumstances. Your median sale price over $1 million, last year is pretty staggering. And so when you look at the incomes here versus the cost of housing, it's really significant. And scary, frankly. The production of affordable housing here, although really admirable, just hasn't been able to keep pace with local need. Your Island Housing Trust, you guys are very fortunate, I think you probably know this, to have a nonprofit on the island that's been really very effective. Not every community can say that. but it's just you can only produce so much housing because there's only so much subsidy, there's only so much land, it takes time to go through permitting, it's just complicated to do. On the good side, there's been support here for the Island-wide Housing Bank, which is a good thing. And that really could be helpful to your community, not just to your community, but to all the communities here. There's been some sharing in the Outer Cape and Lower Cape areas of funding available to support perhaps housing in a particular community because everybody benefits. So on the business side, we're still trying to understand kind of the issues for some of the businesses here. So we're looking at sort of factoids right now. This is the kind of thing you have to do when you start one of these plans, is just getting your head into data. So your largest industries here, I don't think is any big surprise. It's education, it's healthcare, trade, transportation, utilities. These are the industries that employ the most people. When we say largest industries, that's really what we mean. How many jobs do these particular industries generate here? Leisure and hospitality and construction trades. Those are kind of the biggest employers here. The incomes that are generated by local employment are not that high, especially relative to the cost of housing. So your per capita income here, which is basically all the money income in the community divided by your year-round population, is $41,851, which isn't that high. Your median household income, which by the way is going to be a little bit lower than your family income, but your median household income is $51,456, and for renters it's much lower. So that begins to give you a picture of how do people, what money do people have to be able to afford rent or a home here, and it's not that much. You have a lot of self-employed people here, and we care about that when we work in an environment like this, because when I mention those largest industries, that's all based on payroll employment, but it doesn't necessarily pick up all the people who are self-employed. So we're trying to get a little handle on what are self-employed people doing here in hospitality, in culture, the arts, and so forth. Your unemployment rate, at least now this year, has been about 4.5%. Your last in-depth economic development studies that we've been able to find go back really to the 2000s. And there's a passing mention in the 2015 vision plan about business development, but not a lot. So we're really trying to understand more about what is happening with the business community here. We've heard some that there is kind of a sense of frustration around perhaps not having enough of a partnership with the town government. And we're trying to understand more about what's underneath that. A healthy business environment is really important, not only to serve the people who come here to visit, but all of you who live here. I think many of you probably do live here year-round. So understanding how to support that year-round economy is just really key. And this is just these are just charts that kind of compare for you the seasonality of employment. So on my left, mass, leisure, and hospitality, that's just that industry. And how much did it fluctuate statewide over the course of 12 months a couple of years ago? And you can kind of see pretty much everywhere, July, August, the employment in those industries goes up. But the variation isn't that significant over the course of the year. Over on your right, your left, is your own town in those very same industries. And you can just see what the fluctuation is. That's really a challenge in terms of trying to understand how do businesses actually survive here, in those particular industries. When you see those kinds of fluctuations, it really tells you there's a fairly narrow window here within which those industries can prosper. And that's important for us to understand in trying to analyze the local economy. So business districts have a commercial mix of uses, which is kind of a good thing. Whether they're as organized as well as they probably could be, I think is one of the things that we're kind of trying to understand. They're sometimes complementary in terms of the way they're arranged physically, sometimes they're not. There are broader trends at play, which I'm sure you're all aware of, that may come to bear on the strength of some of the business community here. The rise of online shopping, you're not the only place that would be affected by that. Changing roles of Main Street and commercial centers in people's lives, in people's shopping habits, and so forth. In people's sense of where is their social and civic connection and center in their community. That's always been a traditional Main Street function. It's becoming kind of less so in a number of communities. And then, of course, the increase in year-round residents. So these are kind of things we're all looking at to understand the health and prosperity, or lack thereof, or the challenges for the business community here.
All right, hi everybody. Ellie Baker. I'm an environmental planner, so I'm going to take a planner view of what's going on with the environment very broadly here in Tisbury. So just a couple of things here about one of the business districts. Lagoon Pond and Lake Tajmu, both have nitrogen TMDLs. They are both impaired for nitrogen. Nitrogen is, one of these pollutants that's natural, right? But it comes from our development patterns. So the development, as we continue to develop, we have more runoff, we have more nitrogen from wastewater, from our lawns, from our land uses. So you can see in this picture here, the red obviously is the impervious cover. So that impervious cover in these two regions that we're talking about is really creating a lot of drainage and runoff into these two areas. So actually on our walk today, I asked about drainage issues up in the business district up on State Street. And it was kind of like, there's not really a big deal. But one thing to think about is that all of that drainage has to go somewhere, right? It's draining down the road, draining down towards the harbor. So when you combine that drainage issue, the drainage capacity of the drainage system, you're contributing to not only flooding, right, but also to this nitrogen issue that we have. And then this is, I don't know, the elephant in the room or the big issue here, but we're going to do some talking about it today. I have some other maps to talk to folks about. But we have, there is a flooding problem here. It's a combination, right, of storms and storm surge, sea level rise, and this drainage problem that I just mentioned. So when all of these things come together, we have these issues like we have here at Five Corners. And really, this is something that we can logically expect to see more often with changing climate. So we're going to have more intense rainfall, and what that means is that the drainage can't fit in the drainage pipes that you have, so you have some of this exacerbated flooding issue. And then also when you have sea level rise, the water can't get out, right? The water's coming in, it's flooding, and the drainage can't get out, so they're conflicting with each other. So this is obviously, this is a big issue. This is something to be thinking about over the next 5 or 10 years. You're obviously already experiencing some of these drainage issues, but we also have some maps to help you think about the longer term and what does this mean for how you build in these areas, how you might move things, how you might elevate things, and how you plan for that so that you can accommodate some of the housing issues and the transportation issues and sort of the design issues that we're going to be talking about across the board here. So we'll talk more about this. I don't mean to scare everybody with this. I know you're already seeing this issue, but you're on an island, and this is going to be, something you need to plan for. So, I think.
All right, this is the last one here. So the commercial districts and design and placemaking. So we've already kind of covered this, but the commercial districts are this really interesting mix of old things and new things and different kinds of commercial uses. So we've got those water-dependent uses, stuff coming in on barges and going out on barges and ships being built, and then tourist or seasonal-oriented businesses nearby those and year-round businesses. So there's a lot of different kinds of things happening in small areas, and negotiating how those fit together is one of the key aspects of what we're thinking of when we talk about design. So how does the place function overall is one of the aspects of design. Another aspect is that what people think of when they think of design. What does it look like? What's its character? What's its sense of place? So there's a line in the 2015 vision plan for Tisbury about keeping Tisbury, Tisbury. Which you all know what keeping Tisbury, Tisbury probably means, but I don't know what keeping Tisbury, Tisbury means. I have a sense, but we want to get really specific about what keeping Tisbury, Tisbury means, so that you can actually set that down and make that happen. The commercial districts aren't always legible, so again, you know how to get around, you know which streets are one way, which streets are not. I've spent my entire life coming to the vineyard in the summers, but up island, and I can't find my way around Gingerday. It doesn't make sense to me. So, if you imagine you're somebody who's coming for the first time, you get off the ferry, where's the town, how do you get there? Fundamental questions. Functional challenges. So we've covered this. You've got stormwater, you've got rising sea levels, you've got congestion, you've got narrow rights of way, you've got constrained spaces, you've got limited wastewater capacity, you've got parking issues, but you still have this lovely, wonderful community. So how do you make all of that work? How do you keep that lovely, wonderful community and address whichever of those problems are actually problems that are worth solving? And then we've heard repeatedly that there's a really strong desire to make these places better, right? To improve them for the future, to solve some of these problems. And that's what we're going to try to do. We're going to break up into 4 groups. There are 4 tables around the room. Each of those 4 tables relates to one of those themes we've talked about, so transportation, environment, housing and businesses, and design and placemaking.
But really what I'm trying to understand from all of you and have this discussion about is like, what is happening now that is a problem? What is happening now that's something that's actually like a really great?
We have a lot of boats here.
Great. Okay.
I think that'll shellfish decline.
So all the growth that's along this.
So one opportunity.
Now we have the opportunity, sort of building on what the last group said. Here you have an extraordinary sense of place, which is, well, where does that come from? Let's talk about some of the assets in green. The museum on the hill, the wonderful waterfront.
This way.
Take care of this part of it that's paved. Actually, the paved is probably going to go actually to that.
Businesses. There's some potential here. What do you want?
The intersection here should have a bad sticker.
I'm surprised.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Dirk Max from Beta Group. Before I start, I'd like to introduce my colleague Anna Sangri, who came over on the ferry this morning. She's a transportation planner at Beta. So from last night, we had a lively discussion about transportation issues. Thank you, everybody. It's kind of hard to get our hands around everything that we talked about, but I'll try to summarize some of the key themes that we talked about. And as you can see, and there was a lot of comments, and there were a lot more than actually that are posted on here. So kind of one of the overriding things we talked about was improvement of pedestrian and bicycle facilities and safety in town, and making those connections to the other parts of town, from downtown, and promoting the use of safe walking and biking paths. And to do that, you need more and better facilities. So, there can be facilities, but there are still stressful, if you have a narrow shoulder or even a bike lane that a truck is passing by you with, that's maybe within 6 inches of your bike or head. That's not comfortable, so we want to think about promoting less stressful type of those facilities. So that's kind of like an overarching theme, but underneath that, there's a lot of sub-themes, I think. And one of those was, can we limit the number of vehicles, coming to the island? And, that's obviously a lot of coordination to do that, but can it be through legislation? Can it be through limiting the number of vehicles for short-term rentals? Can we look at incentives or disincentives for bringing vehicles over? So there's a lot of stakeholders involved, Steamship Authority, and I think it's an island-wide issue, not just limited to Tisbury. So that's a big one. Another one we talked about was on Main Street, considering a pedestrian bicycle zone for Main Street, at least in the summertime, where vehicles would be prohibited from travel, at least on some sections of Main Street. recognizing that parking would obviously have to be dealt with. So we're not, dealing with all solutions here. Haven't, looked at all the impacts and details, but that's, that's an idea. There's something like that, and some of these other things, you can test as a pilot project. As a temporary pilot project. We do that a lot in some of our projects. So it's something to think about instead of, deciding, let's just do this. We can test it for a short period of time, monitor the use, look at the pluses and negatives, and make adjustments, see if it works. And if it doesn't work, you haven't spent that much money or time to do that. So that's an idea. Transit was talked about. An idea came up. Can we provide a circulator, a bus, around the downtown area, ferry area, perhaps small electric vehicles that serve the area. Could even go in, say, a pedestrian zone on Main Street. Free bus fares came up also. The connector road idea, between State Road and Vineyard Hayden Road came up quite a bit in the B2 area, and providing a connection there to reduce traffic, especially at the Look intersection, but also to redevelop and provide a better network of roadways in that B2 area and to stimulate redevelopment of that area. And I just had a couple more. We talked about reducing the number of trucks downtown, potentially providing another way for trucks, maybe on barges, to get to a lagoon pond, reduce that number of truck impact in the ferry terminal area. And last but not least was Five Corners. We talked about some options for Five Corners that have been talked about for a long time, whether it be roundabout or signalization. We talked about maybe some changes to the actual use of the lanes, in that intersection to improve circulation, delay, and safety. So I think those are kind of the major things. There's a lot of smaller items here. We can certainly talk about it at our groups, but that's what we talked about last night. Thank you. Ellie, you're next. Okay.
Do you have one of your board up?
I don't know if it matters.
So for those of you who weren't here last night, the different colors represent different sort of questions that we're asking. So the green are sort of special places or assets that need to be preserved or celebrated or built on. The reds were sort of issues or problems that need to be solved. And then the yellow is opportunities for the future. So we're going to continue the discussion shortly in the small groups, sort of thinking about what are the top issues that we need to deal with, what are the top problems, what are the opportunities, as Jeff was starting to mention, that we really want to explore. And so we're going to do that for the first session and then have another round of sort of report back.
Thank you, Peter. Hi, everybody. For those of you who weren't here yesterday, I'm Ellie Baker. I'm an environmental planner with Horsley Witten Group. So our focus at our table was on environment and resilience. So for the downtown, some of the key areas that we talked about clearly were flooding. The flooding at Five Corners, the pending or impending flooding from sea level rise, additional storm surge. We talked a lot about drainage issues and how that contributes to flooding. So drainage coming down towards the waterfront that's not being managed and is exacerbating the flooding, causing some flooding, even during low tide issues, but then during high tide and with storms and storm surge, you have sort of this combination of flooding on the waterfront. There was a comment about just sort of the high traffic in the area, creating exhaust and waste in the downtown area, and how might that be alleviated. Concern about shellfish decline on the shore, in the lagoon pond. The need, or maybe lack of need, for dredging in different areas in the harbor for the ferry and for other boats. What that is actually doing with the transport of sediment in the harbor. And And then there was talk about what areas do we potentially need to abandon? Does the town potentially need to abandon with sea level rise and storm surge, and what might that mean for other areas in town? Opportunities in the downtown and the waterfront were significant, I would say. There was discussion of increasing green stormwater infrastructure, like rain gardens and bioretention systems, leading all down the water, all down through downtown, down to the water. And that can both, improve the use of native species, sort of beautify the area, but also serve a very important stormwater management need in the area. There was talk of creating micro parks on Main Street. For those of you on our walk, we talked a little bit about that. That can be combined with this green stormwater infrastructure opportunity. Shellfish were raised as an opportunity both for aquaculture and for cleaning the water. They serve a good purpose. And then there was the opportunity that we heard a lot about, which was this sort of opportunity to really access the waterfront more for social gathering for the community, to have a place to be able to go down, sit by the water, sit on a deck, get together with their, community members. So what that looks like is, up in the air, but there was discussion of a walkway, maybe a resilient walkway that went along the waterfront to provide access. Some sort of maybe a more temporary approach to development or parks along the waterfront that would provide an opportunity for, food trucks or gatherings, parties, festivals, but it's sort of on a more temporary scale rather than permanent buildings so that they can be moved for flooding concerns. And allow for kind of movement, for people to kind of move back away from the water a little bit. There was also discussion of acquiring Bach Park, acquiring some other areas along the waterfront to use for this sort of gathering purpose. And then just creating, I think what you've probably been talking about and heard about a lot is creating the opportunity for buildings to be elevated, for roadways to be raised, berms, dunes, etc. So that was for the waterfront. For the B2 district, there was discussion of sort of a little bit of a trade-off between the downtown, if downtown has to be, if things have to be abandoned a little bit or less development there, there's a trade-off that maybe there could be a little bit more development in the B2 district as a trade-off. And an opportunity to kind of make that a little bit more green up there. There were pluses and minuses mentioned with regard to the sewer up there, the wastewater treatment up there, but there's also an opportunity for solar on rooftop. There's a lot of pavement up there, so there could be retrofits to paved areas and stormwater management with new and redevelopment up there. There could be improved stormwater management opportunities up there. I think that covers generally all of what we talked about. We had a very good discussion. I look forward to more. So thank you. I'll pass it off to Jill.
Hi, good morning. My name is Jill Slankus. I'm a community planner with Barrett Planning Group, and I'll be reporting out on what we heard at the Housing and Economic Development / Businesses table last night. One of the strengths that we heard was that there is housing throughout the business districts. There's a greater desire. There's a desire for a greater variety of housing and unit types. Not everyone needs a single-family detached home, but places where young adults need the chance to move out of their family home and into potential apartments in order to live and work here. There's a lot of potential for mixed use in the two commercial districts. Even with preserving the light industrial uses, and there's potential for artisanal zoning. Housing and land trusts are an opportunity to cut out the inflation of land prices and allow people to buy a home and grow their equity. In terms of economic development, people felt being on the water, being a waterfront town is definitely a strength, and wanted to continue to use that as a strength and think of ways to develop that for Tisbury more. There's a capacity to pinpoint some of the anchor businesses, but there was little hesitation to talk about additional businesses to add to the districts. We heard some ideas, but I think to maybe think of more ideas or any direction that folks think is important to go in that area. It would be good to discuss more today. The extension of sewer is an important aspect in the plan to generate more housing and businesses up to the B2. People express an interest to see more restaurants, more places to eat, the incorporation of food trucks. And they think the current design of the B2 district is not the optimum, maybe design for that space. So there's a lot of opportunity, in that area. And also the vacant buildings on Main Street were acknowledged, but we didn't get to any, exactly solutions of what could go in there. And I know that's ongoing, so that's something maybe we can help to identify and work to identify today. So Judy Barrett is going to go into some ideas for alternatives, and this will lead into our exercise today.
Thank you. Not to belabor the point, but I guess one thing I want to explain, no matter what the topic is that we're talking about, a master plan is ultimately a public policy document. And so everything we think about when we're working on this plan really comes down to a very important question, which is what is the responsibility of local government? Government can bring a variety of tools to improve a community, to make a community the best that it can be. And it's policy, it's regulatory, it's infrastructure, and it's leadership. Those are the four things that local government can bring to the table. So we're listening for what is the capacity of this government to help improve conditions in the business districts, to support the perhaps revitalization of some properties that are vacant, to promote housing policies that perhaps allow for more equitable development, not only of rental but ownership units, so that younger people can actually make a stake here and stay, as opposed to people cycling in and out because they can't afford to actually buy a home and put down roots. So those are the kinds of things that we're looking at. So in that context, things around the sort of business districts, we would be looking at what is government's relationship with the business community and the organizations that represent them. What are the needs of the business community to be as prosperous business districts as they can be? There are things that have been done in some other communities that we will be the first to tell you are not like you, like Portsmouth, like Nashville. They're not Tisbury, but the things they've done and the thought process they've applied to the very same kinds of questions is relevant. So we're looking at kind of what's been going on in other places to address the sort of physical condition of business districts, the attractiveness of commercial properties, managing rents so that a variety of businesses can actually come here and stay, looking at the kinds of spaces that are available. So if you want certain types of businesses, you have to think about, is the real property that you have today conducive to supporting those kinds of businesses? It's sort of like if you need a warehouse and everything is low roof structures, you're not going to get them. So I'm not saying you want warehouses. I'm just saying you have to understand kind of the relationship between the real property and the needs of the business community, and then the conditions. We went out last night after the meeting, and Main Street's dead. So, to someone who's done a lot of economic development work, I'm looking at that and saying, well, how does this, if this is a year-round community, why isn't there more vitality on Main Street at night? It's just an important question to us. So we're going to be looking at kind of those kinds of ideas, but I do think some of the things we heard last night about the frustration of being a younger person living here and not really having many choices to stay. That's a real consideration if you're a year-round community and you're trying to stay a year-round community. So we're going to be looking at things like that, and we want to hear more about your ideas today on all of these topics. What is it that the community can do to become the best place that it can? So I'm going to turn that, I think, over to you.
All right. I'm going to put my big board up here.
I'm not going to walk away with the microphone.
Yeah, I think it was
There you go.
So as you saw how this was organized, we have transportation theme, the sort of environment resilience theme, housing, business, and I'm going to talk about design and placemaking as we did yesterday. And a number of people in the circulation said, well, what is placemaking? And as I said yesterday, it's kind of ironic because Vineyard Haven has world-class sense of place. It's just, you're here and nowhere else. But most of that has to do with the harbor and the views of the harbor, but also the activities of the harbor, ferry coming in and out. the wooden boats, even the activity of the sort of industrial waterfront, all of that contributes to the sense of place. And the history of Main Street, the beautiful buildings on William Street, and everything working together makes it unique. And that's what sense of place is about. And it's ironic because most places don't have that or are looking for it. And that's really what placemaking means. It's like the whole country is covered with sort of suburban shopping strips that you literally can't tell where you are. You could be anywhere in the country at most of these places. And so the idea is, how can we turn these into unique places that you know where you are, that relates to the surrounding landscape? So for downtown Vineyard Haven, that's about reinforcing what's good about it and building more of that. And it's also about, as we discussed yesterday, connecting those small places together so that it adds up into one sort of coherent experience. And we talked a lot about how, from a design perspective, you come off the ferry as a visitor and you're not really sure where to go. And you can do that with signage and have, the so-called wayfinding signage programs, like, okay, I can read the sign, it's going to tell me where to go. But more importantly, you want to connect it in terms of design so that you see where you want to go and you're sort of led through the center in a logical way. And also to build what designers called imageability. So you carry the idea of how this place works in your head. And it's sort of, you don't need a wayfinding map because it's very easy to create a wayfinding map in your head. And there's a whole theory of that over the last 50 years, which is fascinating. But basically it's about knowing where to walk and seeing the key landmarks, orienting yourself. And of course, the downtown, the waterfront, you're always oriented toward the views of the water and the views of the historic district. But there's a lot of disconnects. So what we heard about yesterday is a lot about special individual events, particularly the waterfront, which is spectacular, and some of the smaller parks. There's an interior connection between Union that goes all the way through that could be developed into something really wonderful. And then what to do with the Main Street as well. So we're going to be talking more about that today. In the B2 district, there's, let's see, more of an opportunity for placemaking. Because obviously, as we discussed yesterday, this has evolved as more commercial strip. I think largely because it wasn't really, I won't say it was poorly planned, but it wasn't really planned intentionally. It evolved from, a series of farms that were divided into long lots, and those lots were sort of subdivided going back from the road on private driveways, essentially. And so now everybody pours down to State Road, and then you really can't get back and forth very easily except pulling out onto the main road. Very classic suburban shopping strip issue. And the answer, of course, which we want to talk about today, I won't say it's entirely the answer, but one of the answers is to make those connections across. And that's something that's been discussed here for more than 20 years. And so the key question is, how do you make those connections between the lots in the rear? How do you have the parking you need without having it hitting you in the face as you drive through? And the key question is, can we and should we think again about the idea of connecting State Road to the Acretown Road through the backland? So we're going to be talking about that more today. So really what we're looking for is kind of the charge from you as to what do you want us to be designing as we go forward. Our next step is to go back to the office and the studio and work with the consulting team on drawing up alternatives for these commercial districts. And these are going to be pretty specific, as specific as we can make them in terms of location of new roads, location of new areas for business or housing. And basically, we're going to be asking what needs to be sort of preserved the way it is, what needs to be protected and enhanced, what needs to be transformed and evolved into something new and better, and really thinking about literally drawing on the map what these different areas are. And so what we need again, from you today is really, what do you want us to be designing? What do you want us to be looking at in terms of different alternatives for the future? So we're going to be coming back probably in a couple months with some of these ideas. And so what we need from you today coming out of this is really, what ideas do you want us to be exploring back in the studio? And so that's really what we're going to focus on for the next couple of hours.
What is the responsibility of local government, and what powers can local government bring to the table to address these kinds of issues? Regulatory reform is squarely in the hands of local government.
With a vision for these commercial districts that keys up what the regulatory changes are, what the policy changes are, what the town needs to lead on. So going back to the steamship authority, does the town need to really lead on bringing the steamship authority to bear on what you all want? And then what's the infrastructure changes you guys need? So policy, regulatory, leadership, infrastructure related to B2 in the commercial district.
We're talking about design and placemaking, housing, transportation, climate and resilience, right?
But the step before that is, do we want to allow additional development in this area? And what kind of development do we want? What do we want this area to be in the future? Do we want it to be the way it is now? Do we want it to take the natural course that it'll take if the current trends continue? Or do we want something different? And if we want something different, what do we want? So
whole area is a water protection overlay district.
Question is, a group that could look at this marine district
Looking
again.
at even improving this area, which I know they had just done, and some of that didn't come through, is that whether or not you're going to improve it for housing and business needs as well. I think the whole area should be looked at.
Right. All these boatyards and marinas here should be going into the town sewer.
All right, shifting gears. Although, don't forget, from that bigger map, these two areas do have the connection in that sweet spot in the middle.
Yeah.
The State Road, Edgartown.
But the importance of it is that we are creating more of an economically viable downtown and waterfront. I mean,
Much nicer, and we have so many walking trails on the island that we probably could connect. We could transition some of those into bike paths.
I think are the walking trails on this? Because there are a lot of walking trails.
They're actually on there very lightly in this light green.
Right. Nice loop that is walkable and friendly, and you come off the ferry and you want to do this. It opens up access to a lot of things.
There's a regular, instead of the large buses, we come around to discussing the small little kind of electric transport vehicles that could go a little local.
is we're going to break up into two groups. One of them is going to be focused on B2. One of them is going to be focused on the downtown and the waterfront. We're going to have the report out in each of those groups just focused on those two things, so you get to hear what all the groups talked about, focused on B2 in the downtown. And Peter and I are going to try to draw arrows and lines on the maps that symbolize the main ideas that have come out of the conversations over the course of today and last night. You get to choose your group. You get to choose whether you want to go and talk about the B2 district or whether you want to go and talk about the downtown. I wanted to thank you all for coming. We learned so much about your community, and also learned about your, some of the challenges you face and some of the things you want to make happen. So, just again, thank you for your time. The next step on this is we're going to take the ideas back to the studio, as Peter said, and we're going to try to sketch out some alternatives for these two areas. Meaning, if we take this, if we take path A, what does it look like? If we take path B, what does it look like? And then we'll bring those back to you at another public forum, which I'm expecting to be probably in January, and then get your input on it and see if you can tell us, did we hear you correctly? Did we not hear you correctly? And start to dig into whether path A is the right one or path B is the right one, or the mix of the two. So again, thank you for your time. And we'll see you again soon.